I never imagined my own home could feel so unfamiliar. The day after Ezra's funeral, I walked down the stairs slower than usual, my fingers tracing the handrail he used to polish with such care. I was still wrapped in black, still carrying the faint scent of lilies from the casket, still trying to breathe through a grief that clung to my bones. But my family, they weren't grieving, they were claiming. The moment my feet touched the last step, I heard them, voices bright with excitement, not sorrow. Boxes slid across the floor. Laughter echoed off the walls. Neon sticky notes flashed like warning signs across every surface of the house. That clock is mine. Mark the cabinet, I want that. We'll gut the kitchen once she's out of here. She, not Grandma, not Mom, just she, as if I were an unwanted tenant. I stood at the edge of the entryway, watching strangers wearing my family's faces move from room to room with their phones out, measuring, photographing, scheming. My grandson stuck a fluorescent sticker on my husband's grandfather clock. My granddaughter used an app to redesign the living room while I was still standing inside it. "We should turn this whole place into something modern," she said. "Yeah," her brother replied. "As soon as she's gone, gone." They spoke as if I were a smudge someone needed to wipe away. My daughter-in-law, Dahlia, floated through the chaos with a tray of champagne flutes. "We're celebrating Ezra's legacy," she announced. Legacy. Funny how they used that word when they had no idea what built it. No one offered me a seat. No one asked how I felt. No one noticed I was still wearing the bracelet Ezra gave me on our first anniversary. Instead, Dahlia placed a paper plate of cold chicken in my hands and gently guided me toward the mudroom. "You'll be more comfortable in here," she said. Comfortable. In a room with a mop bucket, a cracked tile floor, and a flickering bulb. I sat on a folding chair while they toasted in the dining room. My dining room. From where I sat, every cruelty reached me clearly. This house smells like old age. She built soups. He built an empire. Think her pension checks keep coming if she, slips away soon. Put her in the shed, at least it's outside. Each comment pressed into me like cold needles. But I stayed quiet. I learned long ago that silence can be misread as weakness. Let them misread. I took a bite of the cold chicken. It tasted like cardboard soaked in humiliation. Still, I swallowed it. I had endured worse than their greed, and in my pocket I felt the crisp corner of the document they knew nothing about. 15 years old, notarized in blue ink, carrying my name as a co-founder of the Starling Trust. They didn't know the fortune they were circling like vultures existed because I sold every piece of heirloom jewelry I owned when the company was dying. My mother's sapphire pendant, my wedding bangles, my engagement brooch, gone, converted into the funds that saved Ezra's company. I never asked for credit. I simply asked for him to survive it. But now, watching my family tear apart the home I built stitch by stitch, I realized something. They didn't forget me. They erased me. I rose slowly from the folding chair in the mudroom. My knees ached, but my resolve did not. Tomorrow was the will reading, and they expected me to crumble quietly in some corner. Let them think that. I still had my voice, I still had my pulse, and I still had a signature that could turn their certainty into dust. Tomorrow, when that will is opened, they will realize the woman they buried in their minds is still very much alive, and holding the one truth that can rewrite everything they think they own. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear, but because of memory. It came back to me in waves. 15 years of silence. 15 years of letting everyone believe Ezra carried the company alone. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I thought love meant stepping back so he could shine, but the truth has its own pulse, and mine had been beating quietly in my drawer for years. At dawn, when the house was still, I slipped out of the mudroom with a small leather folder tucked beneath my sweater. None of them noticed. None of them ever noticed my comings and goings, as if I were a piece of furniture that sometimes moved by itself. I walked 2 blocks to the pharmacy, the one with the old payphone beside the newspaper stand. They had accidentally cut off my cell phone line the day. When I arrived, he didn't greet me with pity. He never had. He looked at me the way Ezra used to, like someone with a mind that mattered. "Let's see what you've brought," he said gently. I laid everything out on his polished desk. First, the joint trust certificate, the one they assumed held only Ezra's name. It didn't. My signature sat right beside his, clear as daylight. Then, the investment agreement from the bank, 15 years old, stamped in blue. Proof that when the company was drowning, I sold every last heirloom I had and wired the money without a word. Last, I placed a stack of yellowed papers on the desk, handwritten pages in my own slanted script. He touched the top page carefully, like it was something sacred. "This is the original proposal?" he asked. "Yes," I whispered. The very same strategy that saved Starling Industries. The blueprint that became the foundation of the IPO. The plan that everyone credited to Ezra. They never knew I wrote it at the kitchen table, long after everyone fell asleep. I still remember the lamplight, the sound of the clock ticking, the way my fingers cramped from writing until dawn. Ezra had been pacing that week, terrified he'd fail. I couldn't stand to see him break. So I wrote. I wrote as though the walls were collapsing and my words were the beams holding everything up. Then I mailed the proposal anonymously, under a pseudonym, L. Rosemont. A name I chose because it sounded harmless. 2 days later, Ezra came home stunned. "Someone sent a brilliant plan," he told me, breathless. "Even the handwriting. It reminds me of yours." I stirred the soup and said nothing. He presented the plan the next day. The board approved it within hours. It brought in millions, and I let my name stay hidden. Not because I wanted to disappear, because I thought our family needed him to be the hero. I thought if he looked strong, they would learn strength from him. I never imagined they would turn that strength into arrogance, or use it to bury me. Mr. Alden called in a handwriting specialist that same afternoon. They compared the curves, the pressure, the strokes. The blueprint matched my writing perfectly. "You understand," Mr. Alden said, adjusting his glasses. "This means the intellectual property belongs entirely to you. The royalties, the patent rights, the legal authorship." I nodded, but I didn't smile. Because none of this was about money. It was about being seen. "If we present this tomorrow," he continued, "it will change everything." I closed the folder and stood. "It needs to," I said. "They've already buried me once." As I stepped out of the office, a strange calm settled into my bones. For the first time in years, my steps felt steady. My spine straightened, my voice sharpened. Tomorrow wasn't just a will reading. It was resurrection. They thought they were meeting to divide Ezra's estate. They didn't know I was bringing the one document that could divide their certainty instead. The morning of the will reading, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It reminded me of the calm before a storm, the heavy kind that bends trees and rattles roof tiles. I dressed slowly, choosing the same beige coat my family called depressing last winter. Let them scoff. It had held me through more winters than their egos ever could. When I stepped into the hallway, I could hear the others getting ready. Perfume sprays, nervous laughter, phones buzzing, the sounds of people preparing to inherit a fortune. They barely glanced at me on the ride to the law office. Dahlia chatted about spa weekends. My grandson whispered about selling the lake house. My granddaughter practiced typing a signature that wasn't hers. I sat quietly, hands folded, the folder with my truth resting under my arm like a second heartbeat. The conference room was all glass and cold light. No warmth, no softness, just polished surfaces that reflected every flaw. They made me sit in a folding chair at the far end of the table, as if I might break the leather seats. No one protested. No one even blinked. Mr. Alden entered with his briefcase, steady, expression unreadable. Everyone straightened, as though preparing for their victory photos. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Today, we will execute the final wishes of Mr. Ezra Starling." Even hearing Ezra's name made my chest tighten, but I sat tall. Then Mr. Alden pressed a silver button on a voice recorder. Ezra's voice filled the room, slow, tired, but clear. "If my son Luca ever speaks ill of his mother," he said, "deduct $1 million for every word." The reaction was instant. Chairs shifted, paper rustled. Someone gasped. My son froze mid-breath. Mr. Alden continued reading from a transcript, their words captured from the house's security system in the days after the funeral. "She's still breathing. Thought she'd be gone by now. She built soup. Put her in the shed." Each sentence was a nail sealing their own coffin of greed. When the total was read, $88 million deducted, Luca lurched to his feet. "This is absurd. She's been draining us for years. Dad wouldn't—" The entirety of the trust, estate assets, and associated intellectual property rights are left to his wife, Evelyn Starling. The folder he handed me was thick, heavier than grief, lighter than years of silence. Inside were deeds, transfers, sealed letters, and one note written in Ezra's familiar script. "Forgive me for letting your brilliance stay hidden. You saved everything. Let this speak louder than I ever could. Something in me cracked open, but not from hurt, from recognition. After all these years, he finally said it. My family stared as though seeing me for the first time, not as a frail widow, not as a burden, but as someone who held the ground they'd been walking on." Dahlia began dialing someone, her attorney, no doubt. The grandchildren sat stunned, phones forgotten. Luca opened his mouth again, but nothing came out. Good. For once, he was speechless. I slipped the folder into my bag and rose slowly, dignified, steady, unmoving as the tide. But Mr. Alden wasn't finished. "There is one more matter," he said, drawing out a second envelope. The room stiffened. "It concerns an intellectual property claim previously undisclosed." My fingers tightened around the arm of my chair. This was the moment everything would shift. He placed the proof of my authorship at the center of the table, my proposal, my handwriting, my forgotten brilliance. My family leaned in like spectators at a disaster. And they were right. Something was about to explode. They weren't prepared for the truth I had buried for 15 years. The truth that would not only take their inheritance, but tear apart their illusions of who built the very empire they worshipped. When Mr. Alden placed the second envelope on the table, the entire room shifted. You could feel the tension gathering like a storm cloud, thick, humming, electric. My family leaned forward, expecting treasure. They had no idea they were about to choke on the truth instead. "This," he said, unfolding the pages with careful hands, "pertains to the anonymous proposal submitted 15 years ago, the very document that saved Starling Industries." Luca scoffed. "I know this story already. Dad had a consultant—" "No," Mr. Alden interrupted calmly. "Your father did not hire a consultant. Someone else submitted it, anonymously, under the pseudonym L. Rosemont." The name hung in the air like smoke. "What does that have to do with anything?" my granddaughter asked, frowning. Mr. Alden opened the next folder. "It has everything to do with this, because after a forensic handwriting analysis, ink assessment, and comparison to archived samples." He turned the document toward the table. "The author of the proposal has been confirmed as your mother, Evelyn Starling." The silence was so complete I could hear the hum of the ceiling lights. My grandson's pen dropped from his hand. My granddaughter's eyes went wide. Dahlia's mouth fell open. And Luca. He sank into his chair as though the air had been kicked out of him. "She?" he whispered. "She wrote it?" I didn't say a word. Not yet. I wanted the truth to settle first, like dust in a long-abandoned room. Mr. Alden continued, "The entire IPO model, the the one that saved the company, originated from these handwritten pages. He lifted the stack gently. This script, this structure, this strategy belongs entirely to her. He then produced a certificate. Gold seal, legal stamps, the whole weight of the Federal Patent Office behind it. Patent 8th 119th 502B, legally attributed to Evelyn Starling. All royalties and intellectual property rights revert to her as the sole creator. My family stared at me like I had suddenly grown a second heartbeat. Dahlia found her voice first. That's not possible. She never worked at the company. I finally spoke. No, I said softly, but I worked for the company, quietly, while you all slept, while Ezra feared losing everything. I looked around the table, letting my gaze linger on each face that had dismissed me for years. I wrote that proposal at our kitchen table. I sold my jewelry to fund the merger. I kept this family afloat when the world thought we were sinking. Luca shook his head slowly. Why didn't you ever tell us? I smiled, sad, tired, knowing. Because I thought you didn't need to know. I thought Ezra needed to stand tall for you. I thought love was silence. Then I paused. But silence became erasure. And once you started rewriting me as the burden in the basement, I realized something. My quiet was feeding your arrogance. Mr. Alden slid the final ledger across the table. A list of every royalty payment generated by my patent. 15 years worth. Millions upon millions. Untouched. Waiting. Mine. This account, he said, tapping the black folder with a gloved finger, is fully transferable to Mrs. Starling today. No one spoke. No one breathed. For the first time in years, I felt tall. I stood, my beige coat falling around me like armor. My granddaughter whispered, "Grandma, you're brilliant." I met her eyes gently. I always was. You just learned to look away. I placed a hand on the folder that held my life's work. Not hidden anymore. Not stolen. Not forgotten. Then I walked out of that conference room with every step echoing the truth they had never bothered to see. But the day wasn't finished. Not even close. Because the legal aftermath, the eviction, the unraveling, the consequences were about to hit my family harder than any revelation in that room. Rehook. They took my home, my pride, and my place. But the next 48 hours would show them what happens when a woman they underestimated finally takes it all back. When we left the law office, no one spoke. My family, those same people who taped neon stickers across my life, walked as if the ground had cracked under them. They didn't look at me. They didn't dare. For the first time, they finally understood who I was. The next morning, the consequences arrived in crisp envelopes delivered by a courier. 48 hours. That was the deadline the court granted them to vacate the Starling estate. The home they treated like a shopping cart. The rooms they measured for remodeling. The furniture they slapped sticky notes on. All of it now belonged to the woman they tried to push into a laundry room. Me. I watched from the porch as boxes thudded down the hallway, but there was no laughter this time, no jokes, no champagne. Just fear, just regret. My granddaughter wiped her eyes as she packed jewelry that yesterday she thought would be hers forever. My grandson moved quietly, shoulders slumped, no neon notes in sight. Then Luca approached me. "Mom." He swallowed hard. "Please. I didn't know. I was wrong." I looked at him, not as a mother desperate for affection, but as a woman who had found her spine again. "You weren't wrong," I said softly. "You were cruel." His face crumpled, and for a moment I saw the little boy who once clung to my skirt during thunderstorms. But I also saw the man who joked about my death. "You spoke first," I said. The will simply answered. He cried, but tears do not rebuild trust. They only reveal where it cracked. Inside, I walked through each room slowly, rediscovering the house the way you rediscover an old friend. But it didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a museum of memories, some beautiful, some bruised. In the guest room, I peeled off the last sticker stuck to the vanity. This one's mine. I folded it into a small square and dropped it into the trash bin. Not anymore. When I passed the piano Ezra loved, I rested my hand on the lid. For a moment, I let myself miss him. Not the businessman, but the man who held my hand under the dinner table, the man who whispered apologies into my hair when the world weighed on him. His note in the will had healed wounds I thought were permanent. You saved everything. Let them know your name. I whispered back, I will. Outside in the backyard, the pomegranate tree still stood crooked beside the path. The rose bush I planted when Luca was 5 clung to life with one brittle stem. I knelt, slow and steady, and poured water from the rusted can I found behind the shed. You're still here, I murmured to the rose. Just like me. The soil drank greedily, as if it had been waiting. So had I. I sold the house the following spring, not out of spite, but out of freedom. Homes are supposed to hold love, and this one held too many shadows. I moved to a small penthouse near the sea, where the light is soft and the silence is kind, where my thoughts have room to stretch. With the patent royalties, I created a foundation called the Invisible Hands Fund for women who built in silence, supported empires quietly, and were forgotten loudly. We give grants, scholarships, and most importantly, acknowledgement. I didn't rebuild my life to punish anyone. I rebuilt it because I finally remembered it was mine. On my balcony overlooking the ocean, I hung a carved wooden sign made from a fallen branch of the old pomegranate tree. It reads, "This home belongs to the woman who refused to disappear." And that's the truth. I was never weak, never fading, never forgotten. I was simply waiting for the day I decided to think and speak out loud again. If you've ever been underestimated, ignored, or pushed aside, remember my story. Silence is not the end. Sometimes it's just the inhale before the roar. Make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you're the first to know when my next video drops.